welcome back to my channel. This is continuing on from my other videos because obviously I've got a lot to say and I won't be able to fit them all into one or two videos at a time. It's very hot today. It's unbearably hot outside. It's humid. I hate this heat. Thankfully inside it's a lot cooler, so that's where I'm staying today. I only went out briefly today because the heat is just absolutely unbearable out there. It's so humid. Oh, horrible. Apparently it's a level 2 heat wave. God knows what level 1 would be like. So yeah, this morning I just spent some more time knitting. My bag is now almost finished. I've stitched together the seams, but I've got to make a handle, so I'm going to try and find out how to use this French knitter I've got, or knitting doll. Work out how to use that using a tutorial. Hopefully it won't be too hard. Then I can make the handle using that. It's got to be about 50 centimetres or so. And then I've got to put some felt in the lining, line it with felt, and sew a button onto the flap. So that'll be fun. So far it's looking very good, very pleased with it. I'll show you the finished result when it's done. Also today I got a fox plushie arrived from eBay. I got it brand new but at a reduced price, bargain. It's Living Nature fox plushie. I'll try and show it to you at some point. Obviously with my OCD I still actually got hand for a bit. But it's sitting next to my other fox because I've got another fox for World Republic, and they look really cute together, and this one is so lifelike. I was like, oh my god, it's so cute. So I was very pleased with that. It's just like a real fox cup, it's so cute. And that arrived today. So yeah, so I want to carry on from where I left off, talking to you about awesome traits and what traits specifically I have, either in the past or now. So I was talking about in childhood and how the main trait I had as a child was social interaction and problems and learning difficulties that the school were concerned with. The school, incidentally, were more concerned with my learning difficulties than with my social interaction problems, even though the social interaction problems were flagged as a cause for concern when I started school in reception, and the school were aware of them, and it was on my educational psychology report, but it was almost like a kind of afterthought, because the main thing that the school were concerned about was my learning difficulties. And I think the reason for that is that schools tend to focus most on learning. So if a child has difficulties in learning and it's going to affect their SATs results, because that's all they seem to care about. If you're in America, by the way, SATs is basically like in the UK it's like a testing system that kids have to sit when they're about, I think, 6 years. This was certainly when I was at school. It might have changed now, but when I was at school you had to sit from when you were 6 years old, and also in year 6, which is when you're 10 years old, so just before you move on to secondary school. And it's quite interesting that the educational psychologist was called in shortly before I took my SATs. So it's in year 5 that they called him in, and my mum seemed to think that there was some ulterior motive at play, that really it was because they didn't want me to take, well, they actually told my mum that they didn't really want me to take a SATs because they were worried about how it would affect the school league tables. Yeah, obviously I didn't say the last bit to my mum because that was kind of like the gist of it, you know, that basically, when it comes down to it, that's what they care about, basically. So if you're a child with learning challenges, but you also have social difficulties, the school will focus on the learning challenges more than the social difficulties, even though actually the social difficulties are probably what's going to give the child the hardest time in life and are ultimately more important. So yeah, the school were aware of my social difficulties and flagged them up, but it was like an afterthought to the learning, and that was the main issue the school had with me, was that I was not learning in the way that they expected a child to learn. That's what they couldn't place, basically, because I was different to most children who have learning difficulties, in the sense that I wasn't it wasn't like I had conventional learning difficulties, because I could read really well, and it was a comprehension that was lagging, and that split between able to read really well but not having the comprehension was something that they didn't understand, which is why I was called an enigma I have a year 1 teacher. But yeah, so in terms of autism traits, another big aspect of my autism is that I get very, very enthusiastic about things, or I get very intensively involved in things. Now, some of this might just simply be my personality, in that obviously you don't have to be autistic to get very enthusiastic about things or very intensively involved in things. But I think where the autism interacts with this is that obviously the autism then makes me not just intensively involved with something, but where that one subject becomes the sole focus of everything, and where historically the only thing I could talk about would be that sole focus. So that sort of feeds into social interaction a bit, or social communication, because obviously that would be the only thing I would talk about, at least when I was at home. Although when I was at school, I don't think I really talked about it so much at school. It was kind of a bit more hidden at school. That might also have delayed my diagnosis, because I wasn't like one of those more, like a stereotype of an autistic person, say he's obsessed with trains, or one of these like really geeky interests and just like talk about them all the time in the playground. I wasn't doing that, but I was intensively involved with food. That was my big area of interest as a kid, was food, and it's still my big area of interest as an adult, or one of my big areas of interest. It's kind of like, it's sort of like a lifelong interest, I guess, that I don't think will ever go, because I've always had this interest in food. Some autistic people are very fussy with their diet and have real issues with food. I'm the opposite. In autism, it is often extremes, by the way. We don't tend to do things for halves anyway. For me, food has always been the absolute passion of my life, the absolute obsession of my life, where I can think about nothing else. So as a child, this would take a form of me memorising what other kids had to eat in their lunchbox. I was fascinated by what the other kids had to eat in their lunchbox, and I knew the contents of every child's lunchbox in my class, because you would alternate tables at lunchtime, so I got to know what every child had to eat in their lunchbox, and I loved to go over this with my parents. So when we went out for a walk, I would tell my mum, for example, what every child had to eat in their lunchbox in order, and I'd go through the whole class telling her exactly what every child had to eat in their lunchbox. This obviously was really exciting for me and made me feel very happy, and I would go to bed thinking about it. And I also had a thing about knowing their birthdays, so it's basically their birthdays, what they looked like, and what they had to eat in their lunchbox. So those 3 areas were the things I would talk about and kind of be interested in, essentially. But it was mainly what they had to eat in their lunchbox, and that kind of, to me, in a sense, summed up their whole character in a way, like what they had to eat in their lunchbox. I knew it all. So that was kind of how that interest took, I guess, manifested itself. But as I say, I don't think people were so aware of it at school, because I was looking at what people had in lunchbox, but I wasn't talking about it at school. It was more like a silent interest at school, but I talked about it non-stop at home, and thought about it all the time and stuff. It's the way I sort of catalogued people. The other way this interest took hold was that when we went into shops, I would always look at every item in the shop. I'd read the ingredients. I'd love to kind of look at all the cans or tins in the shop shelf, all the packaged food. I like to look at all the food, and then I would talk to my mum tell her all the foods I've seen in the shop and stuff. I also, talked about food all the time, what we were having for dinner, what we were going to eat today. I always got very, very excited when I went to someone's house and they served really nice food that I loved, and I would eat so much, and people were like, "Why are you eating so much? You're so slim, how can you fit in?" Obviously I didn't eat all that much all the time. It's just that when I could, I would jolly well eat as much as I could, because it was amazing. Like at the school party, Christmas party, I would keep on going back for more and more and more food, because I just loved it so much. At school camp, I kept on going back for more and more ice cream, and the head teacher even made a comment about it, because I kept on going back for so much. Food, big one. Anything about food, and obviously as I've got older, that's become more into like cooking and nutrition and just food because I love food. That's quite a mainstream interest actually. Lots of people are interested in food and cooking. But the way the autistic element of it, I guess, was, as I said, was that as a child, that was all I could talk about at home, and also the way I went about the interest, I guess, memorised with people in a lunchbox. I don't think most normal people do that, and kind of the sort of cataloguing aspect and the obsessiveness of it, I guess, was the autism bit. So very intense interests, and as a child, as I said, that was mainly to do with food and generally enjoying cataloguing things, and kind of getting into. If I was interested in something, I want to find out everything about it, and I'll kind of intensively want to find out everything about it. Like I couldn't just scan something; I had to take in every single little thing, sort of thing. I loved going to museums and stuff like that, but it would take forever because I need to read every single little thing. Like I couldn't leave anything out, sort of thing. And yeah, so the biggest interest though, as I have talked about elsewhere, so I'm not going to go into this in detail because you can look at my other videos for more on that. But obviously my biggest interest was the Titanic when I was 11, followed by Kate Winslet, and the actress Kate Winslet was extremely all-encompassing, and that obsession lasted 10 years, and saw her films, memorised everything, knew everything, couldn't think about anything else, everything was related to Kate Winslet, it was 100%. It wasn't just your usual teenage obsession, it was an absolute extreme, all-encompassing infatuation. Because when I tell people about my obsession with Kate Winslet, they say, oh, that sounds pretty normal. They don't realise how intense it was, basically. Like, seriously. Again, because my interests were quite mainstream, I think the autism element, sometimes people don't notice as much as, say, if I was interested in something a little bit more eccentric, where the focus is a bit more unusual. Because all of my interest, the actual subject matter has been fairly mainstream. Kate Winslet, when Kate Winslet had a baby, babies and child development. Again, that's quite a fairly mainstream interest. But do most teenagers follow people down the high street taking notes in a baby spotting diary about every single detail that the baby is doing, everything that the baby's doing, like written down? So that's the autism element. But like when I tell people about my interest and I don't go into detail about how obsessive they were and the exact details of them, people tend to be like, oh, that's fairly normal, that's fairly mainstream, like I don't seem to think it's an autism thing, until I explain what I actually did, and you're like, okay, yeah, that's not quite normal. Reading every single child development magazine, taking it all in obsessively, including every single detail, collecting the little things that came with the magazines, listening to nursery rhymes on repeat when I was at 15, not just because I was obsessed with babies and because that's what Kate Winslet would have been doing, sort of thing. So intense interests, they were most intense during my teenage years. Obviously as a child, as I mentioned, it was food and things, so they were there as a child, but it really took off in absolute extremity when I was a teenager. I think teenagers in general are more obsessive anyway, so if you're autistic, I guess it's like you've got the extra intensity of being a teenager, where all teenagers are a bit more obsessive, I think. But then you add autism on top of that, and obviously it's going to be taken to the next level. Okay, so I'm going to move over to video number 2 now to carry on talking about the traits of autism I have had in the past and present. So moving on to video number 2.